Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. We got a little bonus information for you today. We got a bonus session. We want to welcome Suzanne. Suzanne, welcome. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Alex?
I'm doing great.
Good.
Now, go ahead. Look like
I'm excited. We have a bonus session. We ran out of time. We had so many people. Suzanne was gracious to hang around and spend some time with us afterwards. So I don't know if this is like a super secret Easter egg or how we're going to put this bonus material out there, but I'm very excited. So thank you, Suzanne, for being patient and joining us.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Now you presented here, right?
I did. Yeah, I presented
So
yesterday.
What did you talk about?
I had talked about planning for protests and civil unrest.
Oh, that doesn't happen anymore, does it?
Right.
Wow.
So that is something that I had been actually presenting on several years ago about reminding people that this is going to happen more and more. And what happened? Well, of course, it's happening more and more. And so now more than ever, we need to make sure that we're prepared for a possible protest that turns violent, or, you know, sometimes peaceful protests turn violent. So I was talking to people about the different steps to take when you're advised that something is coming. So there's pre-planned events, but then there's also random, let's say an active shooter event or something comes into your space. You don't know ahead of time, so you can't plan.
Right.
But what you can do is educate yourself ahead of time on what kinds of things you need to have to be prepared in case something like that happens in your office or your community or wherever.
Without giving everything away, do you have a few ideas that you could share? Yes.
One of them actually is I was involved in a scenario where there was a large parade. There was over 1 million people at the parade, and it was in downtown Toronto, right after the Raptors won.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah, the championship.
I remember that.
So we all crowded into the downtown, I included. And then I found myself kind of in the middle of the crowd, and we were so packed in that I thought, I just felt something shift. And I thought, I got to get away from the middle of this area.
Yeah.
So then I was also noticing people like in that crowd trying to navigate baby strollers.
Wow.
And I just kept thinking, what if something happens? This is not good. So then I don't know how, if I felt it or what, but about 10 minutes after I moved away to the side, all of a sudden, big trampling happens. I don't know what's going on. Everybody's yelling out, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. There was an active shooter attack right in the middle of the parade crowd.
I remember that.
Yeah. So I was stuck in that trampling. And so there was a lot of things that I looked at and realized and thought we could do better. And so a couple of things was people needed to ensure that people do not enter the area with strollers, babies. You know, people really have to think about, we have a personal responsibility for ourselves, our families. When we go to events, large scale events, again, to think about, you never know if something could happen. So ensure that strategically ahead of time, you're selecting which area you're going to stand in, and then also have a little emergency plan in place with your group should something happen and you get separated. And one thing all parents should try to do is never go into that kind of a packed atmosphere with babes in arms or with strollers, because I can tell you when we were running by, I saw strollers just going up in the air.
Wow.
Yeah.
I remember that whole thing happening. The morning that it happened, it was a little bit late in communicating, but the people I were working for at the time turned around and just said, the crowd is getting bigger than what they anticipated. We knew it'd be big, and we weren't that far away. You know, downtown Toronto, I was near Roy Thompson Hall, and the Air Canada Centre at the time is only a couple blocks away. And when you bring 1 million people together, it really spreads in downtown Toronto. So the employer I had at the time just said, crowd's getting bigger, everyone go home. Now, just go home. And they told us which way to go. Away, you know, if you're taking a train or a bus, go in this direction down these streets because there's nobody there. You know, and they said, just get out. And then we heard all the things that happened later on.
And one of the things that I didn't think of either was that when we were trying to run away, because we didn't know where the gunman was or whatever, a few of us ducked into a store. And luckily, they were kind enough to receive us in
Mhm.
and then lock the doors after. And then they were checking on us, making sure we were safe, saying that we could stay there as long as we felt we needed to. That was really great to see as a practitioner, to see
Yeah.
how a company who actually didn't even have that kind of a plan in place, but was able to just, work on the fly and help people out. But that's another thing, is there's other buildings that lock their doors
Yeah.
right
Yeah,
away because
yeah.
they didn't want, the bad stuff in. But luckily for us, that Canadian Tire store stayed open and we were able to go in.
But how do you get people to change their minds and think like that, though? Because your team, your favorite band, whatever it may be, you've been waiting years for something to happen. It finally happens. You're caught up in the hype and the excitement.
Right.
So you want to be a part of this celebration. So how do you think, oh, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't? How do you get people to really think like that?
Yeah. And I guess it really, we need to be talking about it. And we need to be writing about it, talking about it, to encourage people to listen and want to do something. I know that these days, the protests are worse than they ever have been.
Yes.
And there's so many of them going on everywhere across the world. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of them because of, after the pandemic, all of the mental health issues that were happening, and
Mhm.
people losing their jobs and finances. And I just think that that's going to lead to more of these kinds of instances of protests, civil unrest, and also active shooter attacks.
Well, there have been a couple of those recently. I've seen, even in Canada, what was it, Edmonton, a little while ago, an attack outside a high school where
Yeah.
the young gentleman, unfortunately, after a day or two, succumbed to his injuries. And a lot of it has to do with some of the anger and frustration that people have from COVID. Now you've got all these students that have been working at home, they've been separated from their friends,
Yeah.
and they're already socially awkward, shall we say, in their teens already. Now you're all throwing them back in together, and it's causing some challenges.
Yeah, for sure. Another issue, and so I'll talk a little bit about the G20 and how that's ends up being, a lot of the time it ends up turning from a protest
To
to
a
a
riot.
riot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yes, it does.
So we hosted the G20 in Toronto. And because I worked for Toronto Hydro at the time, I was part of the committee that kind of worked for 8 months on planning
Okay.
for that event, because we knew that there might be, and we didn't want power to go off.
Mhm.
And so we developed all these plans and everything, and we thought we were going to be able to deal with anything that happened. And then all of a sudden, what happened that we needed to respond to wasn't anything that we prepared ahead of time. We prepared for the potential of our trucks not being able to maneuver through downtown if power was out. We planned for, making sure fail safes if the power went out in the center where they were meeting, all of that stuff.
Mhm.
But in the end, it didn't matter. We ended up having like our 5 police cars lit on fire.
Mhm.
And then we
Yeah.
had the Black Bloc group come in and just like trash a lot of the building windows and stuff. But from that, there was one thing afterwards that we didn't plan for. Was about a couple of weeks later, there was some complaints. People were mad about the handling of how people got arrested during the protest, and they were all kenneled in an area.
Yeah.
And so they had said that that was inhumane and they wanted to protest. So a couple of weeks later, they just decide, okay, we're going to protest in an hour in front of the Toronto Police Headquarters. So where I worked was kitty corner right across the street from Toronto Police Headquarters. So we got maybe an hour notice. So right away we had to go to action. We didn't have a plan for that. But so we first decided that we needed to notify our staff of what was going on,
Yeah.
letting them know that they could either shelter in place and we would secure them in our shelter area with food and water and whatever they needed until they felt safe to leave. And then third, we told them to, if they wanted to still leave, to take the back entrance out
Okay.
so they wouldn't be facing. And then also we advised them, if they're confronted by any of them, to not say anything. And then we also provided security assistance to those who felt scared but still wanted to go home. So we would walk them to their vehicle or to the public transportation system. But these were all things that we had to come up with this in like 10 minutes and then get it all out and ready. And luckily, we didn't have one staff person that was even confronted by anybody.
Good.
Mhm.
That's good to hear. But some of these protests do come out with no warning.
Right.
Just something happens. You don't even know that something's happened a couple blocks away. And through the grapevine, social media, really, instantly something's announced. And before you know it, there's a bunch of people there.
Yeah.
You don't get that opportunity to sit down and, well, okay, what are we going to do? No talking, no planning. It's action.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes people forget they want to, well, did we plan for this? And they try to talk about the situation rather than, you don't have that time. You're in a situation. Time is not something that's a luxury. You don't have extra time. You're already behind the 8 ball. Act. You have to act.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm glad you shared this topic at this conference, because I think there was maybe before last year, especially in the United States, this misconception that protest in the United States happened in the 1960s. And then that was and protest and riots happen in other parts of the world. But to your point, as we've seen not just around events like G20 that are historically, protests and riots, but these are happening at a higher frequency across the globe. And it is something that organizations need to be prepared for, because they can, to your point, spring up quickly. Protests sometimes do become riots within moments. There's not like a text that goes out, hey, now things are going to go from civil and lawful to unlawful. And I think organizations, the things you did at Toronto Hydro, companies need to be prepared to immediately protect their people, protect visitors, like they did at Canadian Tire with you, their assets. These are things that are going to happen at a higher frequency.
Yeah.
A question for both of you. Do you think that organizations need to focus on more of these people riot demonstrations and the people triggers of situations? Not just, fires, floods, and those kind of things, but really starting to look at what triggers or things that can set off people.
Yeah. I believe so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. It'll only improve things. Sorry, I lost it for a second. You can cut that out.
Okay. Go ahead, you say something.
No,
James?
but a lot of the response techniques that you teach people in a panic situation are also applicable to a fire, to a tornado. It's rapid response. Can people recognize what's happening, and understand and act on it quickly? So I think there's no downside focusing on people risk in addition, not instead of other types of risks. That's one mistake I see organizations make. They have like fire and tornado drills, and then they have a fire, and then they stop doing tornado drills. Well, if you had tornado drills in the first place, it should be in addition, not instead of. So if you're now training your employees and your teams on the possibility of protest or riots, do that in addition to the other life safety training you're doing, not instead of or take away things.
Yeah. And I wouldn't say that it has to be, developing and everybody has to have their own, plan for protests and civil unrest, but it needs to be an area that people really do think more about, just like we do with all other natural hazards, and think about and be aware that these things are happening. And a lot of them end up being violent and people getting injured. And even like concerts, where the Travis Scott concert in Houston last year,
Yes.
10 people died from a trampling. That should not have happened.
No.
So nobody wants that to happen in their community. So we got to figure out how we can work together so things like that don't happen again.
Yeah, that Travis concert there reminded me of the Who concert in Cincinnati, right? Back in the 80s. And that was really kind of the first time I ever heard of something like that happening at a concert.
Yeah.
But the same things happened again at Woodstock years later with, what was it? Limp Bizkit, I think was the band that was kind of getting people all edged up to, and people got injured and property was destroyed. the Travis Scott, you had the opportunity for the guy in Vegas who shot from a hotel. I can't remember his name or who the performer was, but tons of people happened there. It seems we forget about these risks by bringing all these people together, that if you put 16,000 people in an arena, there is a risk something might happen in there to these people.
Yeah.
So Suzanne, if people want to connect with you or learn more about what you do, what's the best way for
Probably
them to reach out to you?
Best way would be to go on my website, and there's a contact form there too, and you can kind of see all the different things that I've done and do and offer for people. And so they can go to my website, which is www.suzannebernier.com. Very simple, just my full name. So again, www.suzannebernier.com. And I look forward to hearing from anybody who's interested in knowing or learning any more.
Great. I know we met years ago at Continuity Resilience Today over a couple of beers, listening to a live band.
Yes.
If I recall
Nice.
correctly. Yeah, that's how we met.
It was great.
You had just released Disaster Heroes.
Yes,
if I
that's
recall.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a book, her book,
Yeah.
Disaster Heroes.
Oh, and that's also a website in case you want to check it out. www.disasterheroes.com.
Well, thank you very much, Suzanne. I'm
Thank
glad you were
you.
finally able to stop by. I
Yeah,
know
me
work,
too.
work pulled you away, but
Yeah.
you were still able to join us.
Well,
so
and thank you for accommodating.
Oh,
Of course,
our
always.
pleasure. As a thank you, a signed copy of my last book, Planning and Performing the BIA.
Thank you
So
so
that
much.
is for you. Thank you so much.
Thank
you,
you.
Suzanne.
Good. Thanks, Suzanne.
All right.
Enjoy the rest of the conference and your stay in Louisville.
Thanks. You guys too.
Thank you. Thanks
Wonderful
for stopping by.
talking.
Great. Have a great day.
Okay, you too.
If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.